Super Troopers 3 is the third installment in the Super Troopers franchise. I have seen all three, but to be honest, I don't really remember the first one or the second one that well, aside from a couple key elements. Now, the third one is definitely interesting. From the trailers, I thought it wouldn't be very funny, and watching the first 30 minutes of the film, I still thought that this was not going to be funny. The dildo is that it kind of is so committed to building its own language that it is constantly reintroducing these bits that I did not find funny originally, but over time they coalesce and build into something that I actually found a lot funnier than their individual parts. This is truly invested in building its own kind of comedic language. And by the end of the film, we have so many elements that you've learned coalescing together into like this kind of comedic puzzle that's firing on all cylinders, where even if you don't necessarily like any of the individual jokes, I feel like you do have to have a kind of respect for how this builds into a grammatically very interesting comedic piece. It also goes quite off the rails. I would say this film is not grounded at all, especially by the end. There is a particularly unhinged reference to Empire Strikes Back that they really go shoot for the moon with. This is the kind of raunchy, off-color humor that's not necessarily going to work for everyone. I do like that kind of humor when it's done well. And like I said, a lot of this was not hitting for me, but I got so invested by how committed it was to its own ideas that it ultimately won me over. I would say probably close to two-thirds of the jokes in this did not land for me at all, but I still had a really good time with it because it is just non-stop. One thing I noticed in this movie is we will literally go entire scenes where there is not even a full second gap between the dialogue and the characters. Now, some people would probably call this bad storytelling. It makes the acting stilted. It feels like the characters aren't necessarily reacting. But for a highly dialogue driven comedy like this one, I think it does kind of work in its favor because it is so rapid fire, several jokes a minute. It's able to pick up the slack on a lot of the jokes that might not necessarily be landing or working for other people. So I think as a comedy, this film ultimately does succeed. Now, as a mystery movie, I don't think this lands at all. It's kind of repeating some ideas. There are multiple twists and turns, but I feel like if you're thinking at all, they're kind of obvious. There's not even a lot of really red herring elements or anything. Most of the mystery beats are so straightforward to be almost irritating in how blatantly simple they are, as well as one final twist near the very end, which I think is kind of immediately obvious just from the film's initial setup. Now, that being said, I don't think this film takes its mystery element very seriously, and I think it spends so much on the character and comedy that ultimately becomes kind of background noise anyway, so it doesn't really hamper the film as much as you might think. The majority of this film, he is getting married to this character's sister, and this character does not approve at all and is doing everything he can in his power to stop the wedding from happening. Meanwhile, he continually manages to win over her and her parents, much to his chagrin. So that's kind of the center of this film, and I think they're able to get a lot out of that. There's actually some things that had a lot more depth than I was expecting from a movie like this. There's even a whole critique on a certain character who is the kind of faux progressive who is so overly performative about his progressiveness that he, kind of loops around to honestly being possibly the most racist amongst the group, which is something I have definitely seen in real life, especially during my college years. There are certainly people like that. Obviously, this being a legacy sequel, there is quite a lot said about aging and getting older. Many of these characters are also very adverse to change. There's a whole arc that a character has with dealing with an electric car when he's a big fan of gasoline. But I felt that the film always did at least try to say something with all of its character arcs. And I actually grew to like this cast quite a lot by the end of it, despite really having very little memory of the first two films. There is a post-credits tease for a possible fourth sequel. I couldn't tell if this was a joke or not, but that would be interesting to see. I kind of want to revisit the first two films because there are some jokes that carry over from the first two. So this overall is very raunchy, very off the rails, very joke a minute, and a lot of the jokes don't hit, but it's so excessive with them that it ultimately wins me over. It builds its own language, which allows it to coalesce a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And it honestly has a lot of heart at its center, which I was kind of surprised by. So, despite not liking this film from the trailers or even probably the first 20, 30 minutes, this grew on me a lot and I did have a really good time with it. And I would watch another sequel for Super Troopers. Ultimately, I gave this a 3 out of 6, and that is a very, very high 3.
3 out of 6.